Well, Happy New Year, everybody. Thanks for joining me. Today, I'm going to start my very first Puzzle Rush survival of the year, and I'm going to shoot for the first 20 puzzles. And if we survive those, I'm going to pause the rush, and then I'm going to try to play a rapid game. And that's one of my favorite things about the Puzzle Rush survival mode. There's no timer. There's no rating on the line. And what's also nice is as long as you don't click like quit session, you can resume it later. So let's get started here. Having a little bit of tea, a little bit of a 2025 cold lingering into the new year. So let's see what we can do. All right, we just lost our queen, but we want to think about what was left behind. The rook was guarding the back rank, and we want to look for checks in particular. The only check we have is rook b1, and now the queen can block, so can the rook, and then it will be a mate. Okay, very good. And again, we only have one check, and it appears to be a checkmate. So if you're just starting out with puzzles, it's a really good warm-up to do Puzzle Rush Survival. And the other thing that I think is useful is, if you notice what just happened, we solved one puzzle and then boom, we're faced with a new problem. I always recommend hit the back arrow because sometimes with puzzles, it sort of feels like you're in an airplane and you're just pushed out of the airplane, you parachute down into this unfamiliar terrain and you're trying to figure out what to do. I always recommend hit the back arrow, assess the terrain, figure out what's going on. And one thing we can do is a quick material count. Looks like all the pawns here are symmetrical, so that's looking good. I'm noticing 2 pawns here, 2 pawns here. It looks like we're down a pawn on c7, so that's one thing from the standpoint of material. And the queen and queen, the rook and rook, and the minor piece and the minor piece all balanced. So here we're down a pawn, and bishop h3 is played. Now another thing I recommend doing is give your opponent another move. What would they play? And for people that are newer to the game, this can take a little bit of time. But again, just kind of look at the most forcing moves first. So you assess the terrain. Once you're ready, you hit the forward arrow. And now if we give our opponent one more move, queen g2, checkmate is a threat. And notice we're unable to capture the bishop here because our pawn is actually pinned to our king. If we try to capture the bishop, it would expose our king to attack by the queen. Now, we definitely feel a sense of urgency here. Like if black gets one more move, it's mate. And I think this is a really healthy thought process that you can use in each and every one of your own games. So another big benefit to Puzzle Rush is you're kind of preparing, a healthy thought process that you can use during your games. Now, we know what the scoop is. We know what the threat is. Mate on g2 is a problem. But if we look at our checks, there's only one, as far as I can tell. And it's also going to be a checkmate. Notice the queen and rook, we call this a battery. Once 2 pieces are lined up together, we have a battery, and kind of like a battering ram, we shoot down the c-file here, and we're ready to crash through the castle gates. And notice I have one attacker directly, the queen on that pawn, one defender, the king, but behind our queen, don't forget about the second attacker, sort of x-raying through our queen, the c7 pawn. So like 2 cars kind of connected, like train cars, where one kind of chugs along down the track, the other follows. So here we have queen c7 mate. Now, I'm not going to hit the back arrow every single time, but just a reminder that if you're new to puzzles, you see a quick move made, we call that the pitch by the computer, kind of get the puzzle to chill out a little bit and process the terrain on your own terms. If we look here, black is up tons of material, an extra queen, some pawns, an extra bishop, you name it. So we're down material, and we always are trying to figure out what our target may be. And here, the king is unable to move off the back rank. The pawns are in the way, and our rook guards this square. And just kind of like how we had the queen and the rook connecting before, delivering a mate, I want to try to connect my knight and my rook and harmonize these pieces. Now, where do they both meet? Where could they both possibly play? Here would be one meeting point. Both pieces could, move there, but don't want to lose our material. What about here? Knight, let's try that again. Knight and the rook can also meet for coffee on the e8 square, and here we will have a nice checkmate, rook e8. All right, boom, bishop a3. Another battery, threatening the rook, you could argue. A queen capturing two rooks, not bad. On the other hand, looks like we have some harmony again. Where do the knight and rook meet, especially around the king? So if I move my rook here, king is unable to capture because of the knight, and the king can't move here because of the knight also guarding that square, and it's actually blocked by its own pawn, so it looks like we have another mate. Okay, interesting. The rook is threatening the knight. Now, if this were your own game, and your opponent, you're threatening your opponent's rook, and they attack you, it's so easy to even take your mouse and immediately react and hover the cursor over the knight and be like, I better take that pawn, right? But a big thing that's so important, do I need to react, right? And also prioritizing forcing moves. We talk about checks, captures, and attacks. This would be a capture, forcing to some extent, but not the best move. What else could we play? Well, if we only look at the knight in isolation, we will only find a move like here, right? But if we say, hey, how do we combine the power of the knight and the rook? A rook is attacking here just by itself. So the second you move your knight, for example, the rook isn't really working with any other piece in attack yet. On the other hand, the knight and the rook both look at f6, not a great meeting point, protected by the pawn and the rook. But what about here, f8? Knight's guarding f8, so the rook could jump here, and again, takes a little while to kind of visualize. Can the king take? No, because our knight guards the rook. So again, we have a nice knight and rook checkmate. Okay, what now? This is where we get into tricky territory. After the move knight f5, so I always kind of hit the back arrow. I'm not going to do it for every puzzle, but just to sort of encourage you to do so. It's good to kind of assess the terrain here. And if I look at the pawns, I see 3 pawns here. I see 3 pawns there. I see 2 pawns here. I see 3 pawns here. So we're up 1 pawn, but we're also down a knight because I can kind of quickly subtract the like elements here. Queen, queen, rook, 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 rook. And so we're down a pawn. We're up a pawn, but black is suffering a lack of knight. There's an extra knight for white. And so after the move knight f5, I feel more comfortable looking at the position again. I had to pause the video for a second, had a little bit of a coughing spell there. So with black to move, I want to first understand what is my opponent going to do next. Remember the power of 2 pieces combined. The rook and the queen here have created a battery, and they are knocking on the castle gates on that c7 square, not unlike a puzzle we solved earlier. Now, our queen is guarding that pawn. So here, if we gave white another move, this would not be a checkmate because I would be able to take with my queen. The rook would take our queen. And then after the king recaptures, when the smoke clears, what did we give up? A queen and a pawn for a queen and a rook. So that's good news for us. So I don't really see the sky falling here. Okay, maybe there's a pawn hanging now by the knight, but no immediate threat, so I feel good about that. Now, on the other hand, I was looking at the harmony between the rook and queen here. Do you see a harmonious battery from our perspective? Here we have the queen and the rook lined up together. Rook is backing up the queen, and the queen could leap to the e1 square. Very scary looking check. Very scary looking offer to lose our queen, but do we have a follow-up? If I play check, you take me, I also take last. So here we can play queen e1, rook takes rook, checkmate. Okay, here I think we have another example of do I need to react? if you're playing your own game, when your opponent threatens your rook, it's very easy to kind of zoom into that one square and say, okay, I need to move my rook. And hey, my queen is also guarding g2. So in a game, you might be tempted to take the pawn with the rook, which is not a bad move. You know, moves your rook to safety, you win a pawn, and you're now opening up a diagonal, pointing directly to the king. Not bad. But when you have an option of two attacking pieces to work together, one is sort of the attacker and the other is the helper, always remember to reverse the roles. If I play rook takes pawn, the king cannot take the attacking piece because the helper there, the queen, defends the rook. Flip the script. And let's look at a more forcing order. What if my queen is the attacker and the rook is the helper? By looking at it that way, the queen can take the pawn with check, by the way, and the king would be unable to capture. I'll put the queen here to make sure I don't make an accidental move. If I take the pawn, the king cannot take our queen because the rook guards the queen. That would be checkmate. So here we go. Nice harmonious mate. Okay, queen takes pawn. And here I'm noticing right away the rook is hanging. You know, so if I give my opponent another move, well, I don't really see any big threat here for black anyway, but this move really stands out. I take the rook, I check the king, no defense. Checkmate. Okay? When you're playing a rook and pawn ending, you know, it's always important to open a window for your king. And you have to be careful about opening up this back rank because in the opening, it's a really good idea to castle. But as you enter the endgame, two things. You don't want your king to be exposed to an attack with no defense. But the other thing is your king becomes a really powerful piece in the endgame. When the giants are no longer roaming the earth, you're not dealing with the queens and so many pieces. The king becomes kind of a minor piece of its own, right? Very strong piece. And, you know, it's always looking for its opportunity to shine in the endgame. So in this case, the king is actually too safe. It's protected by 3 loyal bodyguards here, but it cannot escape the back rank. So here we can just play rook b8, mate. All right. That's a very scary looking move. The rook captured the pawn, exposing our king to a possible bishop attack the second the rook moved somewhere. So that looks like a big problem. Now, on the other hand, we have a very forcing move. We have a check. And here the king is, after check, the king is unable to move here because of the pawn. So we have a very nice mate. All right, let's kind of push our way to 20 now. Checkmate. Okay, queen is under fire. Like so. What was that knight doing before? It was here. Could have captured the pawn. Similar outcome, by the way. And the knight threatens our queen, but what is the space left behind? It's now opened up a contact point on h7, and our knight also guards that pawn. So let's go. Boom. Mate. Okay. Queen, rook working together. I see 2 attackers, 1 defender, the king. And that defender is our target. So we could attack and have the queen help, or we could attack with the queen and have the rook help. And the queen is the better option. Sometimes people are reluctant to kind of jump into the action first with the queen. Such a valuable piece, right? But here, taking with the queen is key. You attack the king, and you guard those 2 diagonal escape squares. So that would be mate. Okay, what was our last move? The pawn captured here. Pawns open windows for pieces. Always look out. Anytime a pawn is moved, think about where it was before. Here it was guarding 2 diagonals. Once it moves here, it's no longer guarding this diagonal. Where does that lead? To the king. The king is unable to move here or here because of our pawn. So that means queen h5 is checkmate. Okay. Another interesting knight-rook pattern. What else is going on? So we check the king. It moved here. If we give black another move, our rook is hanging. Not great. But I'm noticing our knight and our rook work together. If I throw in a check here, king is unable to move because of the knight. Can't take our rook because the knight guards it. So this looks like yet another really nice rook knight, harmonious mate. Okay. What is going on here? C5. Any big threats if black had another move? I don't see any. There's check, but we could take the bishop, worst case scenario. Nothing too scary as far as I can tell. If I look at my checks, I could check here. King can't take because I have a helper. Reverse the role. I want the attacker to be the most valuable piece. Think about that first. If I go here, I'm attacking the king. Bishop is helping, so king can't take the queen. And you can't move here because the queen is blocking the king. So this is mate. All right. Looks like the knight captured, what was that? A rook. What is the space left behind? Look at that diagonal, wide open, cleared for business here. Knight is forking the queen and the bishop, and rather than taking, which could be tempting, right? We want to harmonize. Checkmate. Okay. Another good puzzle. What's white doing? We call a rook reaching the 7th rank as a pig, or pigs if you get 2 rooks on the 7th, or in this case, black's 7th rank is the 2nd. And we call them pigs because they gobble up everything. The rook is ready to gobble up a whole bunch of pawns here, maybe check our king, but look at our rook eating all of the 2nd rank space here. So the king is unable to retreat, blocked by its pawns. Our king guards all 3 of these squares against the king, and that means I can play f4, mate. Okay, here's our last puzzle. The rook just captured the knight, and again, anytime a capture occurs, we zoom in, we get really tempted to take here, and all I recommend is to zoom out. What else is going on in the world? There are 63 other squares, and if I look for checks, sacking my queen, I don't like that very much, just lose the queen, right? What about here? Checking the king, can't then move here because our queen guards. That looks like mate, and there we have it. So that concludes the first 20 of our Puzzle Rush survival. The main thing to remember, you can't see it here, but maybe I'll create a screenshot. As long as you don't click the quit button, which is at the bottom of the window, and you just close the browser, you can return by just going to Puzzles and Puzzle Rush Survival, and you will be returning to this exact position. So keep that in mind. So, if you're doing a Puzzle Rush Survival and you only have, a little bit of time on a coffee break, or, you start to get tired, whatever, nothing wrong with just simply taking a break and closing the browser and returning later. And that is what we're going to do. So I'm going to post this to the YouTube channel, and then I'm going to play a game in 15 with 10-second increment, and I'll share that later on. Well, once again, hope everyone has a happy new year, and I'll talk to you later.